With this seminar for today. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد وعليكم السلام اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين لا سيما مولانا وسيدي صاحب العصر والزمان روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء وأجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف ولعنة دائمة على أعدائهم ومنكر فضائلهم إلى قيام يوم الدين أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. First off, thank you for coming out today and participating in this seminar on how to write an Islamic will. Inshallah, hopefully in our discussion today we want to go through the PowerPoint that I have presented. And it's not in particular to one specific marja taqleed. Majority of the issues of inheritance are universal amongst all of our scholars. You will see at the end that there are a few exceptions to that rule, and we'll go over that when we get to that portion. But generally whatever will be presented today is the mainstream Shia ulama opinion, and there are no major divergences. But if you do have any questions, obviously we can talk about those at the end in a Q&A session, and then if we don't have the answers, we can inshallah get details for you at a later date. So we begin today with this will seminar, and basically want to look over many aspects of the importance of writing a will within Islam, and then also the specifics of how actually we go about this at a practical level, and what are the rights and responsibilities for us as we go forward in this process of life. So let me begin with the Quran first of all and see how Allah speaks about the concept of writing a will. Because obviously, as we know, all of us are going to leave this world at one time. And as we know that Islam, as this perfect religion, it has never left out any aspect. It is concerned with us in how we come into this world. So our parents are given guidance when they conceive. As we know from the hadith of the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, that when a child comes into the world, there are rules and regulations and customs that we follow, like the walima, the aqiqah, things like this. And all through life that continues. And obviously at the time of our death, we have things that are taken care of, not only at the time of the funeral, but even as a person is dying, there are rules that have to be followed. And one of those, obviously, which is an act which takes place while we're alive, but is not used until the time that we die, is the will, right? So while we're alive, we write the will, but it doesn't really benefit us or the community or our family until the time that we leave this world. So Allah talks about the will in a few different times in the Quran. One example is this verse from Surah Al-Baqarah, verse number 2, verse 180. And Allah says, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمْ إِذَا حَضَرَ أَحَدُكُمُ الْمَوْتِ إن ترك الخير الوصية للوالدين والأقربين بالمعروف حقا على المتقين. That prescribed for you or made an obligation for you when death approaches any one of you and he or she leaves behind any property, is that they make a will for their parents and their close relatives in an honorable manner. And this is an obligation on those who are the God conscious ones, the ones with taqwa. So a will is actually and let me just mention this at the outset that, if we lived in a Muslim society today where they had a Muslim court and Muslim government, we wouldn't necessarily have a need to write a will saying that my mother would get this much, my father would get so much, my children, my spouse, because it's understood in a Muslim society those rules would be implemented, by the family, by the court system. But when we live in a society which is a secular-based society where laws are not according to our religion, this is where the will becomes more important, because we can't go to the secular courts for these sorts of things, right? It's not, I would even say, not permissible for us to do that, because Allah has laid down certain rules for the inheritance. So we obviously, as believers, we want to follow those rules, including in issue to the will and the inheritance. But Allah tells us in this verse that when death approaches, and none of us know when death will approach, right? So don't think of this verse as being okay, when I'm 80, 90, then I'll write a will. Hadith tell us that even if you have like $1, a dirham in your pocket, you should write a will, right? Once you become baligh, once a man or woman become of the age of maturity, they should begin to write a will. You know, they may have a bank account. Sometimes our children who are 15, 16, they have savings accounts, they have money in their name. They need to ensure that even that is written into a will. And we'll give some hadith of the importance of writing a will as well. Again, we have multiple hadith. I'll just mention one tradition first of all from Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And he says that the one who makes a will, and in this will he does not oppress anybody by taking away the rights of inheritance, and does not cause harm to anyone, it is as if he had given all of his wealth away in charity during his lifetime. So you see the importance, right? That writing a will is not only a requirement, but as our Mawla says, that when you do that and you ensure that everybody gets their rights, which we'll look at today, it is as if you gave all of that wealth away in charity in your lifetime. So we receive the reward of, you know, as if we've given away all of our wealth, and plus the reward of actually having given to our family their due shares. So again, it's very important for us to realize the importance of writing a will from the legal perspective of Islam. What is a will? A will, or sometimes you'll see the word testament. Sometimes they will use these two interchangeably, the last will and testament, or you'll see a combination of these words used. So there's 5 definitions to what a will is, or actually, a will is made up of these 5 different portions. Number 1 is that a will is instructions for a person for certain acts to be carried out on his behalf after his death. So that's one portion of a will. And we'll look into these in more detail as we go through the presentation. Number 2 is that, or some of his wealth become the property of another person after their death. The third aspect of a will is that ownership of some property be transferred to somebody. Number 4 is that some wealth be used in acts of charity or welfare after the death. And number 5 is that they appoint somebody. A will is a document which would appoint somebody in that as a guardian and a custodian for their children, their minor children, and or any dependents that they have. So really a will look into all 5 of these portions. So we will go over these and to see how each of these would affect us in writing an Islamic will. So number 1 is that according to Islamic law, a person that dies and leaves any inheritance, they may apportion 1/3 of their estate, and we'll get the definition of an estate as well, as per their wishes. And the remaining 2/3 are distributed automatically according to the preset inheritance laws. So, and we look at this in more detail, but basically that will basically says that when you die, all of your entire estate is grouped together, whatever, let's say even physical property, a house, a car, anything that has any liquidity that could be converted into cash, that is your entire estate. That is divided into 2 portions. 1/3 is for you, the person who's writing your will, that you can tell your deceased how you want that 1/3 of your will to be spent. And the other 2/3 are what we refer to as the automatic distribution, the percentages for the parents, for a spouse, for children, and others who are entitled to inherit from us. As I mentioned, just as a recap though, that in non-Muslim societies that we live in, for example, that do not recognize Islamic law for inheritance, the vehicle which is used to provide these instructions of how this estate should be divided is referred to as the will or the testament. So one of the questions that comes up from both a religious and a secular perspective is that, is a will really needed? Do you really have to write a will? Right? Some people say, well, I've gone to my lawyer, I've done the legal will, is that enough? And so this is this one understanding of that question, that is a will really necessary? From a religious perspective, your heirs may not get what they are entitled to from Islam, and ultimately we will be responsible for this with Allah. Right? Just as you and I are responsible for our prayers, our fasting, Hajj, if we have any qadha that we haven't made up, we have to be accountable to Allah for those. Similarly is the will. If we don't write a will and we die without that, then we are accountable to Allah on the Day of Judgment. If our family did not get their due right from whatever we had left for them after death. And also from the secular setting, right, from the Canadian law that we live within, if you die without a will today, you die what they call intestate, which basically means the provincial government would decide how your money is divided. You and I would never have an opportunity to actually determine that, right? The government will come in, and let's say you have multiple children or people who will inherit. If they want to take your estate to court, they can fight for it, and you'll lose time. Money will be lost in paying legal fees and all of that, and basically it would make for a very messy outcome, right? So that really answers the question from a religious and a secular perspective of the importance of a will. Now, obviously every province has their own intestacy rules, and they define how much each beneficiary would get. And usually that would mean that your legal spouse and any biological, or if you have adopted children, they would likely end up with the assets, but parents would not, for example, according to your laws. And so obviously, as we go through this, keep in mind that if you do need to get specific information, from a legal perspective, if you have a lawyer, please by all means speak to them. Find out information from the Alberta perspective if you're a resident of Alberta, just to make sure that you're also covered on that side. But if you do write a legal Islamic will and it fulfills all the criteria, that would stand up in a court of law as well. And just to mention that there is no need for a lawyer to be involved in that process. As I mentioned though, intestacy rules, if you don't have a will, they don't take into account any intentions you have for how you want your money to be distributed. So let's say you want money to go to your charity, to a center in Edmonton, or you want money to go overseas, to an orphanage, or to some good cause, right? That would not happen if you don't have a proper will, because the court won't say, well, he was a Shia and they wanted money to go to Karbala or Najaf or an orphanage. No, they will only look at it from a local domestic perspective, and your children and your spouse, what they would be getting. And obviously keep in mind that any legal costs will come out of your will as well, right? If you don't die with a legal document, and the court steps in, the province of Alberta steps in, they will take their money for all the work that they do. That means obviously your inheritors would get less. So again, I repeat the fact that the importance of a will is that for some it may become wajib, compulsory to write a will. Bearing in mind all the things that I've just mentioned about what will happen if the provincial government steps in. And so obviously, we need to make sure that, and it's a very simple process, it doesn't have to be too complex. But I do again advise and recommend that we do take this opportunity to actually go forth and create this document. So let me give you some of the reasons again why, in more detail, of why we should have a will. One, as I said, and to go into further elaboration, are missed obligations. Right? Maybe in our life we haven't paid our khums fully, or zakat. Maybe we missed some namaz in our lives, right? Sometimes when we're young we forget, we miss prayers, we're busy playing, we don't have time to make them up. Maybe we missed fasting a couple of Ramadans, maybe we were sick or we were traveling or whatever. We haven't done Hajj perhaps, and it's been an obligation on us, or any other obligations that we have, right? If you don't have a will written and you don't say, let's say that, I missed 3 years of prayers, I missed a couple of fasts here and there, and you pass away, nobody would know to make up that for you or to pay somebody to do that, right? So in order for us to make sure that we've covered all of our religious obligations, if we have anything outstanding, we need to write that down in a will to make sure that when we pass away, our family, our loved ones will make sure that they fulfill those obligations on our behalf. Number two, obviously, is the intervention in the bureaucracy of the authorities, right? The government, as I said, will appoint somebody to resolve the will issue. That has tax implications, it have legal implications, and obviously the time and all the effort involved when the government steps in this area. So government and tax or legal implications. Number three is security and well-being of our surviving family members, right? We're all concerned about that. We have life insurance policies, we have savings, we have RRSPs, we have all of these things that we put in, because sometimes we feel that, okay, if I pass away, then at least my wife, my children, maybe my parents will be taken care of. That way they won't have to work as hard. So when you have a will, you're basically providing security for your family after you. If you don't have a will, obviously your estate is tied up in a court of law. It could take months or years for that settlement to come. And meanwhile, that money is being held in a bank account. and there's no interest being generated, there's no benefit coming back for the inheritors. The inheritors might not receive their rightful inheritance, what Islam has laid down, right? Because each inheritor gets a certain percentage. Maybe family members might fight, right? Unfortunately, we've seen this, I'm sure maybe we've heard examples of Muslim families where brothers and sisters are fighting one another for money, right? Their mother passes away, the father passes away, and rather than the family consoling one another, it's all about how much money they want from the inheritance. Right? So a will hopefully prevent that fighting from happening amongst the brothers and sisters and other inheritors. Or maybe you just want to gift something, right? You have a special Qur'an or a special ring, or you have maybe something you got from a gift from somebody and you want it to go to a certain person. Or maybe you have a gift, you want to give it to your local religious center, to the masjid. Right? When you have that will, you can specify those things. So certain gifts are given to certain people within the will. Number 4 is the wishes of the deceased may not be honored. So that 1/3, which we'll look at a bit later, would not be spent how you wanted it to be spent. So 1/3 of your estate, we have free reign over what to do. But if you don't have a will, then you have no say in how that money is spent. Maybe you have some extra things in your estate you wanted to give to certain people. Again, that won't happen. And any gifts you have. Maybe your mother left you a jewelry set that she got from her mother when she got married, let's say. And if you don't write in your will that that goes to your daughter or who it goes to, then again, whoever is inheriting or whoever has access to your estate, they'll just take whatever they want, right, ultimately. So again, another important reason to make sure that everything is written down and put into paper. Number 5 is that any acts of goodness and charity may not be performed, right? So you want to, maybe you want to give some gifts you have at home to your religious center as a remembrance of you. Maybe you have books or something of value, maybe rugs for the center or artwork. None of that would happen if you don't have a will written. So again, the importance of making sure that that document is there and preserved. And number 6 is, again, the jealousy amongst the surviving family members, that sibling fights may take place for the portions of the estate. The inheritors won't receive what they are entitled to get from Allah's rulings. And so in summary, basically, it just makes, what you leave behind much more difficult for people to deal with. And so to alleviate all of these issues and many more, it obviously makes it easier to write a will and codify all of this. And ultimately, it gives us peace of mind, right? So if you're on your deathbed, you're at home and dying, or you're in a hospital, hooked up to machines, whatever happens, you don't have to worry when you're in that state of what's going to happen to my family after me. Where will my money go? Where will my inheritance go to? Because obviously, when you're in the hospital, you're worried about other things. Right? And I'm sure we've seen maybe family or friends who are in hospital hooked up to machines, they can't even speak. Right? I've seen people who are in comas and maybe they didn't write a will. So it's like they don't even have an opportunity at that stage to even tell their wife, I'm going to leave this for you, or their children will get this and that, because they can't even communicate with people around them. Right? So it makes it all the more important to have that peace of mind, while we have that opportunity, while we're alive to do so. Eventually, though, we get that phone call or that email, or that WhatsApp in today's day and age, right? Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Somebody calls us and says somebody passed away in our family, maybe a loved one. And obviously, as Allah tells us in the Quran, that this is a reality for everybody. Everybody has to face death. And then obviously from that point on, a huge process goes underway. Not only, obviously the burial of the family member is first and foremost, that's the most important, right? Making sure that our loved one gets the right burial, and there are so many issues which are related to that. I don't want to really go into the details of that, but the ghusl, the kafan, all of those things are also legislated by Islam. Just to mention 1 or 2 points though, which is I think sometimes a confusion in our communities and societies. All of those actions that are done, like the ghusl, the kafan, the namaz al-mayyat, the burial, these need to be paid for from our will, right? So let's say today in Edmonton, let's just say the cost is, let's just say $6,000 for a full burial. It's not up to the Jamaat or an organization to pay that expense, right? Me as an individual, me myself, I should have that much money in my will set aside for my loved ones, that they have money to bury me. Right? Nobody should be burdened on that. Now obviously if people are poor, that's a different issue. Our community should support them, should pay for their burial. But ultimately you as an individual are responsible to pay for your own funeral. Right? The wajibat. Right? But also keep in mind that it is haram for anybody to charge for the services. So let's say a community today is providing the service of a ghusl or kafan facilities. It's haram for them to charge for those processes. So a jamaat can't come and say, we're charging you $500 to do the ghusl. That process has to be done free of charge, right? They may come and say, well, you've used electricity in the building or there's a water charge. That would be okay. But to say that the charge is for the performance of the actions is not permissible. Similar with the kafan, right? It's actually mustahab for you and I to have our own kafan. And actually hadith tell us if you have a kafan, it's one of the ways that you can have a longer life. So Allah says, if you prepare for your death, I will give you a longer life. Right? So this is why a lot of us, we have this tradition. We go to ziyarah, to Karbala, to Najaf, to Iran, and we buy kafan from there because it's mustahab, it's recommended. And incidentally, it's actually also mustahab to have the most expensive kafan. So sometimes I've seen this when I lived in Iran, people would bargain with the people who sell kafans. Give me a deal, give me a discount. Do you have a cheaper material? It's actually mustahab to spend more money on your kafan. Right? We spend thousands on our wedding dress, we spend hundreds on a suit for our marriage. Right? We'll go and buy a pair of shoes for $200, or women will buy a purse for $1,000. Right? So if we're going to spend that much on living, we should spend a good amount on our kafan, because that is ultimately what we're going back to Allah in. Right? We won't go back to Allah in our Lexus or Mercedes or BMW or three-piece suit. Right? That kafan is what we'll be presented to Allah with. Right? So it's mustahab to spend as much as you can afford on a very good kafan. Right? Look for good material. When you go to the harams, you can see, Dua Joshan and Kabir is written on some, Ziyarat Ashura, these things. It's recommended to have these. Right? But again, that should be from your estate. The Jamaat is not obligated to provide. If they have it available and you need to buy it, so well and be it. But as a community, individuals, we should have our own kafans for ourselves and for our children, obviously, as well. So once death does happen, the very first thing that goes forth after the burial and everything is completed, obviously, and the grieving period has transpired, the family have had that opportunity to cry and to remember, is that we realize that when you and I were alive, we owned all of this stuff, right? We have homes, cars, phones, televisions, computers, all of these gadgets that we have, everything we have, that was all my property. I owned it, I bought it. But when we die, that ours is no longer ours, right? It's now held in trust for certain people. Right? The house was mine. My name is still on the title deed. The mortgage still says my name on it. Right? The car still has my name as the owner of it on the pink slip. But when you die, that's now in limbo. It's waiting for somebody to take that possession into their property. Right? So there becomes this transfer of our estate at the time of our death. Before I go into the percentages and who gets what and why, we have to realize in Islam we have rights. Right? There are rights and responsibilities that Allah has put into place. And we have two different kinds of rights in the world that we live in. We have divinely ordained rights. These are laws that Allah put into place. Right? Some rights are function, or they're fashioned rather by Allah. And some of the rights we have are based on the society that we live in. Right? And so what we have to appreciate at this portion of the discussion is that sometimes we might find that the social rights might give us more advantage than Allah's rights, right? For example, when it comes to inheritance, and we look at specifics, but generally in an inheritance, if a man passes away, his daughter would receive less than his son, right? The daughter would receive a less of an inheritance percentage-wise than the son would. From a social perspective, that seems unfair. If you have a son and a daughter, let's say they're twins, right, born at the same time, maybe a few minutes apart, they're equal in every aspect, right? They have the same upbringing, the same knowledge, maybe everything is the same. But Allah says the girl will receive less than the boy. From a social perspective, from a secular rule, that seems unfair. Why would Allah discriminate? Or why would we look at it as being Allah discriminating? Right? Because our society tells us boys and girls are equal. Men and women should get the exact same inheritance. Right? And maybe if you go to a court, they'll say if a man died or a person dies, husband, wife, and they have 2 kids, a boy and a girl, that they should all receive an equal amount, perhaps. But Islam comes and says, no, there are divine rights as well that Allah has put into place. And we'll look at one of the reasons why, but there are times when we will see that Allah's rules, His divine rules, are different than the society's rules, right? And what Allah's rights that He has given to humanity and to the believers will be different than the society's rights. And so at one level we have to appreciate that there is always a wisdom behind why Allah does this, right? Why does a girl typically get less inheritance than the boy? There's a reason for it. All of these are obviously, there are discussions that I don't want to go into in too much depth, but just as they relate to the will, we'll look at them. But to realize that there is a difference between Allah's rights and the society's rights. And our responsibility is to follow what Allah wants from us. But we can still inquire and we can, find out why that exists. And we'll see how in Islamic rulings that there are what I'll call legal loopholes. There are legal ways that Islam has allowed us to use the rules of Allah in ways that are not in stone. So Allah gives us rules, but there are always exceptions to the rule, right? Like prayers or namaz. Dhuhr, let's say, is 12:29 was the adhan today. But we have until just before Maghrib to pray. We have a 4-hour window in the winter time, right? If you don't have water, you do tayammum, right? So all of these, there are exceptions to the rules. And so even within the inheritance, we'll see that there are exceptions to what Allah has put into place. Going to the division of the estate, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, that the sum of our estate, and I'll define the estate a little bit later, but it basically is divided into 2 main aspects. You have the 33%, 1/3, which is our absolute control. We can do whatever with that we want. We can give it to our goldfish if we want to, as people give to their pets, they inherit, right? I mean, that's an extreme. I wouldn't advise you to give your pets any money, but people have done it. But you could do whatever you want with 1/3 of your wealth. You can give it to, a family member who won't inherit, give it to a friend, give it to anybody. And then 2/3 are what is the rule of Islam, that the Sharia has put into place, that 2/3 is what goes to the inheritors. So what is an estate, right? Because what I've talked about up until this is just some generalities, but what is our estate? How do we define what is going to go to the inheritors at my death? Basically, these are the 6 main categories, and we could probably add more to them. But cash, right? You had cash in your pocket, you have bank account with cash in them. That's a part of your estate. All of your investments, so if you have any RRSPs, any RESPs for your children, let's say they're the education savings plan. You have GICs, you have any kind of mutual funds, whatever investments you have that are in your name, that are your money, that is a part of your estate. Any stocks, bonds, other investments you have in your portfolio, that's a part of your estate. Jewelry that has any worth to it, right? Watches, rings, necklaces, earrings, anything that has value to it. Cars, other vehicles, and anything which has any monetary value that you can liquidate and get cash for it, right? Your house is an example as well. But we'll look at the house because it has some unique ways of it being divided amongst inheritors. So I haven't really included it in here for this time being. But these, and really anything that you have in your life that has value, right? So you might ask, well, what about little things, right? I have a cell phone. I bought it for $300-400, but today it's only worth maybe $50, right? Or you have a library of books at home, pots and pans, things like this, right? Which they were worth something at some time. Those, we'll look at it a bit later, but really for this part of our discussion, we would say that they're not really a part of your estate, right? Because your phone it's your phone, right? Your computer at home is your computer, but when you die, it really has no value. And most of the time, a lot of those things are family, right? So I buy a television. It's not my TV, it's the family television, right? Or we buy a fireplace for the home. Or you buy a sofa, right? That's not my sofa, right? It's maybe from my money, but it's for the whole family to use. So you wouldn't really classify those little things in your life as being a part of the estate, because that's really just a part of common usage of the entire family. So what is not the estate? What things are not to be, which would not go to your inheritors? Again, and these are just three, and there may be more. Property that you own in partnership, right? Let's say you and your wife, let's say you as the man have bought the house with your money, but then you and your wife get together and you buy a house, let's say overseas in your home country, or you have a property in Florida that you bought together as a vacation spot, or you bought it with a friend as an investment opportunity, right? It's a partnership with a friend. That would not be a part of the estate because you don't own the entire asset. Again, cash or investments that you own in partnership. Maybe you and your wife have your own bank accounts, so that's yours. But then you share a bank account, right? Maybe for daily expenses that you each put money into. That shared account with your spouse or with maybe another family member or a business associate, that would not be a part of your estate. Because that has to be done outside of the rules of the will, because now you have other people that are a joint owner of that property. And the life insurance policy also is not a part of your estate. So the life insurance policy obviously is paid to the benefactor, or the beneficiary rather. So if you name your wife or your children or somebody, some communities I've seen people will actually have their jamaat, their institute, as a beneficiary of their life insurance. So they'll have, let's say, $500,000 policy. They'll say half of it is for my family and half of it is for the masjid, right? And that's very well legal as well to do. So that does not become a part of the estate, right? That would be separate. So let's say you have a life insurance policy and you pass away, whichever spouse passes away, that does not go into the estate to be divided. That will be directly to that individual. So if my wife is the beneficiary, then at my death, she would inherit that entire life insurance policy. It's paid out to her, right? It's not going into the estate to go to my daughter and whoever else would be there to inherit that money. That's kept aside. When we look at the inheritance, what Islam does is it gives us different levels of who inherits, right? So first and foremost, from that 2/3, and again, these are determined by the ayat of the Quran. They're actually specific verses that detail who gets what. They're very complex verses. I don't want to bring them up into our discussion today. But Allah, the way Allah does it in the Quran and the way our scholars explain it is there are multiple levels, right? Just like a building has 2, 3, 4 floors. So at the very first level of inheritance is the spouse, right? So a spouse will inherit regardless of who else is alive within a family, right? So even if there are mother, father, children, cousins, uncles, aunts, grandparents, they might receive inheritance, but if a spouse is there, automatically the spouse is level 1 to inherit. Not everything, but she or he will get their portion that they're entitled to inherit. Parents and children are also at the second level. So even if there is a spouse, still parents and children do inherit. Obviously, if the spouse is out of the equation, then the first level would be the parents and children. If there was no spouse, let's say a person was single, they weren't married. Let's just say their parents were not alive, they didn't have any children, but they still have an estate. Then Islam says the grandparents, the siblings, meaning the nephews and nieces, would then be at the level of inheritance. If they didn't even exist, if you didn't have any grandparents, no nephews, no nieces, nobody else, then your paternal uncles and aunts and the cousins from there, and the maternal uncles and aunts and their children. And then obviously if there's nobody at that level, then in an Islamic system, the Islamic courts would come into play. But the point to keep in mind is that a spouse always inherits. And then from there are parents, the children, and if they're there, then nobody else will basically inherit. So that first circle of the parents and children, if they exist, then the grandparents, those people will not inherit. Once you remove that parents and children circle, then the next circles will inherit accordingly from the, again, based on the percentages that the religion have given to us. I want to talk about a bit about the properties and the joint possessions that people have. Obviously, many of us probably own our own homes, whether they're under a mortgage or we paid them off, whatever the case may be. But in most cases, in most families that I've seen, there are exceptions to this. Most times, husband and wife will be joint owners of the property, right? They are both working, husband and wife are both working, they're both paying the mortgage. So they both own that house, let's say 50-50. In Canadian law, upon the death of one of the spouses, the money and the property, like the house and the land, transfers over to the surviving spouse. So today, if a man were to pass away or a woman were to pass away, they owned a house, that would automatically be the property of the surviving spouse. Obviously, if they're not there, there are different laws, but the other spouse would take ownership of that property, the land that the building is on and the physical house. Now, the problem with that, again, and this is where we see how divine law is different than the social laws of our society. The problem with that is that this does not fall into the rules of Islam. Islam does not allow for that form of a property to be transferred from the spouse to the other spouse. So here is one of the examples that in Islamic law, with the death of the husband, so this is keeping in mind a house is bought by a husband and wife. They've both paid into the mortgage. They are co-owners of the home. Husband passes away. Him and his wife were partners in it. The house, the physical house, half of that house becomes the inheritance of the wife. Only half, because they were 50-50 owners. But in Islamic law, the wife is not entitled to inherit the land. So you can see there's a bit of a problem, because in Canada, you can't just lift up a house and move it and here's the land, right? Land and house are one title deed pretty much. They, back home, maybe, where many of you come from, you can buy land in your country, right? You can own a piece of land. And then you can build a house on it if you want, or you can keep it empty, whatever the case may be, right? But in Islamic law, the woman would not inherit the land and the value of that land. She only inherits the physical house. So what is the solution, right? A man passes away, husband and wife bought a house, they, land was there, they bought a pre-built home, let's say $1 million home. Let's say she's paid half and half, so $500,000 each. But she's only entitled to 25%, so half the value of the house, because she doesn't own the property itself according to Islamic law. So what is the solution for it? You can't divide the house, you can't lift it up and move it. How do the Islamic scholars tackle this solution? We have a few ways, right? And this is, again, very practical. I'm sure this will affect many of us. Maybe we have homes and we are in this situation. How do you deal with it from a Islamic perspective, keeping in mind that, as the hadith from Imam Ali said, that if you write a will and everybody's rights are maintained, the haqq of everybody is maintained, it is as if you've given all of your wealth in charity while you're alive, and will be accountable to Allah on the Day of Judgment with our will, what we gave to people. So how do we resolve this dilemma? Rule number one, again, these are what we call these legal loopholes within the Sharia that we have. Legal loophole number one is you give a conditional gift. This is a very legal basis. There's no games around with this. The Sharia allows this. It's the concept within the fiqh of Islam that you can gift that house or anything you have to your wife during your lifetime as a conditional gift, with the clause that if you divorce before you pass away, that gift is null and void. So for example, you can write in your will and let your children know, let your inheritors know that I am going to give my house as a gift to my wife. If I pass away before she does, the house is a gift to you. And that's not a problem. So that kind of a conditional gift is very well and valid within Islam. And as I said, it can be done for anything. You have some jewelry, you have a car, you have some wealth that you want your wife to specifically get. Although she might not be legally entitled to it, you can give it to her as a conditional gift. Did you have a? Yes. So the house, from the Islamic perspective, so for example, if you had a husband and wife own a house and they paid 50-50 of the mortgage, so the wife, so if the husband passes away, right, the wife owns 50% of the house, but the husband's portion, she might not be entitled to inherit. And the land, she wouldn't be entitled to inherit. So with the conditional gift, what the man would be saying is that I'm giving you the entire house and the land, the entire package as a gift to you. Yeah. That would be written in the will, correct. Yeah, that should be written in the will. Specifically that you're giving, for example, the man would say, I'm giving my wife as a conditional gift, as long as no divorce or anything happens, that she would take over, she would have as a gift the entire house, the land, everything involved with it. Yeah. So, I mean, that would have to be up for discussion between the husband and wife. Yeah, if they own multiple properties, let's say that as investments or as a vacation home, they need to specify that in their will as well and be very, very specific about those properties. Yeah. Yes. If nothing is written, then, well, one of the challenges that comes forth, if there was no will at all, is the government will come in, the provincial government would step in to determine who gets what. And if the spouse were to get more, let's say, than she or he is entitled to, or the children were to get more, then they're entitled to Islamically, and they don't give it back to the inheritors, then they are accountable to Allah on the Day of Judgment, and the person who didn't write a will and clarify all of this, that person will also be accountable to Allah of why they didn't make those specifications. Well, I mean, obviously those kinds of case-by-case issues would have to be dealt with probably in a legal perspective. You know, we wouldn't say that the woman is thrown out of the house because she has nowhere to stay. Yeah, exactly. So I mean, you know, there has to be obviously that if their children are involved, let's say, you know, they have to be, you know, they need to be involved in this process as well. And it becomes obviously a bit more complex at that stage. But, you know, again, so that's why Islam says that especially the will should be taken seriously, and it should be written, and everything should be put into writing. And, you know, witnesses should be there. You should have also, and we'll talk about this later on near the end, is that the importance of having executors, people who will implement the will, right? And it shouldn't be family members who are standing to benefit from the will. It should be a third party. We'll talk about that later, but that also becomes important so that these sorts of issues would not transpire, that somebody is sort of left with nothing and they're, you know, nowhere to turn to for support. So another option, so one was a conditional gift. That's one way to resolve the situation. Another one is the 1/3 option, right? So as I said, if you write a will with a 1/3 clause where you can spend it however you want, you could actually use that 1/3 clause to give the land and the house to your wife. And as the example we have is that so it becomes a bit more technical. I don't want to go into all the formulas, but just to give you an understanding, so if the value of half of that house and the land, right, which is owned by the man, was less than 1/3 of the estate, then you could give the entire house to your wife and that land from that 1/3. Right. If the value was more, so the house and the land is worth, half of that is worth more than 1/3 of the estate, with that 1/3 which you're allowed free reign to spend, then you need to confirm with all of the heirs, children, and whoever else is as an inheritor, that you're giving the house to the wife after your death, and if they approve of it, then, and that's in writing, then there's no problem. So you can either use the 1/3 or the conditional gift. Personally, I think the conditional gift is better and it's safer, because then you're allowed to use that 1/3 for other usages, right? But if you tie up your 1/3 in the property, the land and the home, then you are not able to use that 1/3, for example, if you had qadha namaz or fasting or hajj or things to take care of, you wouldn't be able to unless you had a large surplus to take care of that. So probably the conditional gift would be the best way to go, where you can give any gift to an individual with those conditions tied to it, and then use that 1/3 for something else later on in life. So let's go to some of the actual distribution of the estate. So as we said that we have the two portions, the 1/3, which is your personal, and then the 2/3, which is the inheritors. So that 2/3 makes up obviously the bulk of your inheritance of the estate, and there are specifics of how that amount is distributed. I won't go into specifics in terms of percentages, but I'll give you a website where you can actually calculate the numbers. But before anybody inherits, let me also just go to this point, that before anybody inherits any amount, right? So person passes away, let's say today, their burial is done, the family now sit down, they open up the will, they see all of these things in the will, who gets what of all the inheritance. Before that money is given to everybody, there are certain expenses that have to be paid, okay? Obviously, credit card bills, if the water bill was due, the power bill, those obviously are part of that. But this list has to be checked off and implemented before anybody inherits even a penny. One are legal debts, so any kind of loans. You borrowed $100 from a friend, or you borrowed $10,000 from the bank, right? You took a loan on your line of credit or something. That has to be paid before your inheritors get any money. Mortgages, debts, right? People say, well, I have a $500,000 mortgage. How am I going to pay for that, right? If it has to come out of your estate, not many of us have a $500,000 in cash or anything that we can liquidate to pay off those mortgages. So obviously that will be, there are issues of life insurance, mortgage insurance, different possibilities, and maybe at a later date, maybe the community can actually, call a financial advisor or planner to have a session on how to deal with those aspects from the legal perspective, because I don't want to give legal opinion because I don't have that background that I can give you that. But from the Islamic perspective, legal debts, all of your debts have to be paid. So if I was to die today, my wife and all the inheritors, before they can inherit, they need to make sure if I have any loans from the bank, my car payments, my loan for the cars is paid off. If I borrowed money from somebody, that's paid back. Any kind of debts I have on my head. Religious debts, right? Let's say your home's date is September the 1st. You die March the 1st, right? So you haven't paid your homes yet for January, February, March, and for the previous year. So your family needs to be able to calculate how much homes you owe on your money, right? So that means as Muslims, we have to be very meticulous and careful of how we keep our finances, right? Whether it's Excel spreadsheet or we have our own accountant that does our accounts, we should be keeping day-to-day or monthly accounts of what we owe to Allah, right? Just as I make sure that my wife pays my MasterCard and Visa and American Express, what about Allah? Right? He has a right for the khums, right? The Ahlul Bayt have a right in that money. Zakat, maybe a kafara we owe. We broke a fast in Ramadan intentionally, we owe that. We didn't perform Hajj and it was wajib on us, right? That has to be paid before my inheritors get a single penny from my money. No, that would be, well, that's from your total estate. So even before the 1/3 goes out, basically. Even before the 1/3, all of these expenses need to be covered. Yeah. Yes. Okay. So interest is allowed to be, yeah, sure, no problem. Yeah, so basically, generally speaking, interest is obviously what the Quran calls riba is haram. But our maraja have given us exceptions to that rule based on their understanding when a loan is taken for a necessity, right? So none of us can probably afford to buy a house with cash, so we take mortgage, and our maraja said that that's allowed, no problem. We need a car, for example, food, clothing, shelter. And paying interest for those is not a problem. The only time interest becomes a problem is when we're buying things that we don't need, right? We have one house already, we want another house, right? We already have 2 cars, we want a 3rd car, right? New television comes out, we want the new TV, not that we need it. And we don't have the money, so we charge it and we pay interest, or we take a line of credit. That interest is haram. When it's on things that I don't need to buy, that are not a necessity for my life. Yes. Yes, exactly. Correct, that's legal. Yeah, not a problem. Yeah. And obviously each one of us, we have to determine that for ourselves, right? What's the need and what is agreed in our lives. Even for example, just to give you a completely unrelated example, but somebody once told me that they really wanted to go to ziyarat of Imam Rada alayhi salam in Mashhad, but he didn't have the money for him and his wife and the multiple children. So he took out a loan, he took against his line of credit to go for ziyarah, and he's paying interest on it. So we asked the Maraja about that, and they said, no, that's haram. Yes, it's very good to go for ziyarat, but you don't do that when you're paying interest at, sometimes a huge amount. If it's on your credit card, it's like 29% interest you're paying, right? So even sometimes good actions, right? You won't give 10,000. You won't take an interest-bearing loan for 10,000 to give it to the masjid for renovations. Let's say, it's a good thing that you're doing to renovate. But if you're going into debt, paying interest, does that, do the pros outweigh the cons of it? Mm. Yes. Mm. Correct, yes. This is the problem. Mm-hmm. Correct, yeah. Yeah. So definitely another has to be fulfilled. I would suggest don't make it that difficult on you. Yeah. 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 So, either A, don't make that kind of another, or B, don't make it time specific. Just say, I'll go when I have the means to go for ziyarah, let's say. Right? Don't say, I'll go in the next year for sure. Just say, Allah, if it happens, I'll make ziyarat when I have the financial means. So you're not binding yourself to a specific time frame. And then, no, it's okay. So yeah, we should be very careful, obviously, when we make a promise to Allah that it's something that we can fulfill, and that we don't have to go into, more hardship to get to that. Mm-hmm. Whoever it is, government, he doesn't have the money to pay. Mm-hmm. How do you take care of this? Obviously, I'm sure the legal system has rules with how they deal with that. Like, the person has passed away, so I don't think their inheritors, I don't think their family are liable for their debt, right? Then you bury that person with debt. So this is where, many times maybe family will come in and they'll say, we'll have to pitch in and help out our loved one, right? Rather than them have to suffer any ill consequences for that. And I think this is why Islam also tells us to live within our means, right? Obviously, homes and things like this is difficult, but in every other aspect, if you and I can get away without borrowing and charging and spending more than we make, then we should be doing that, right? But we live in a society where it's so common, just charge it, right? I'll pay it next month, right? But we don't know, if I die next week, will my family be able to pay my expenses, right? So it's important that we look at it from that perspective, that if I was to die today, and I think about this every day when I go home, right? When I go back to my family, that I look around my house and I see how much stuff I have. I think to myself, if I was to die today, would my family be able to get rid of all my junk? What will they do with it? Will they be able to pay my expenses, right? So I try to make sure that I don't have more expenses than I need, and that my income will allow me to pay. Right? So as individuals, we have to think about this on a day-to-day basis and teach our children to be very, not cheap, right? But to be very conscious of what they spend and how much they spend, because we never know when we can go, right? And we don't want to go with a huge debt on our head that we can't, our family can't pay after us, right? Because we're going to have to pay some price in the grave, God forbid, if they can't pay the price when, and they're going through trouble now to pay for that. So, as I mentioned, the wajib portion of the funeral, these are from our estate, right? The Jamaat might come in and say, we'll pay up front, but individuals have to pay that, right? We can't let any community have that burden on them, right? The ghusl, again, the Jamaat can't charge for it. It's haram for them to charge for the action, but they can say, because you've used the facilities, you've rented the center, we need to charge for lights, power, water, whatever. That's, that's reasonable. It should be a reasonable amount. If I hear communities charging $1,000, members pay this, non-members pay this, why a cash grab, right, from a community? If they're a member and they died, and a non-member who died, well, they would use the building for 3 or 4 hours. Is it fair to charge them, right? But I mean, as a community, if this is happening in any community, the members need to speak up and be vocal about it. I mean, I can give you my opinion, but it's not a religious opinion, it's personal, right? But communities should think about it, right? Because we all have to go sometime. And sometimes you'll come across community members who can't afford to be buried. They just don't have the money, right? I mean, I remember back home in Ontario, we had a young girl who passed away. She had Down syndrome, 14 or 15 years old, and her parents, who were Shia, they literally abandoned her. They went back home to their home country. They couldn't deal with her because she had Down syndrome. They left her on the doorstep of a non-Muslim society to take care of her, and she died. Now, who's going to pay for her funeral? The parents didn't want to do anything with her, right? So the community had to pitch in and got donors, and they paid for this girl to be buried, right? We can't just let her be buried by the Christians or by the non-Muslims, right? So my point being is that as a community, we have to have that compassion amongst one another, right? And treat one another like we would want to be treated, right? At the worst of times, because yeah, when we're rich and we have everything, it's easy. But if you've never seen poverty, then you don't know how to deal with that situation, right? So, but the point here is that that's an expense that should come out of my estate. So if I know today in Edmonton the burial expenses, again, let's say 6,000 or 10,000, I should try, as an individual, try to keep at least that much aside in my will, in my inheritance, if I were to die, right? So my community, my family don't have to run around and try to find that kind of money to pay the funeral expenses. So again, we go back to the chart. The 2/3 are distributed by the Sharia, by the rules, and 1/3 is our absolute control, which we have the right to spend on whatever we want. Let me look at the 1/3 for a bit here to see where we can spend that money, what are our permissible usages of it. One is that it can be used, so this is again from the 1/3, but also from the estate, the portion of the estate. So let me just mention here that 1/3 is, again, we have the entire estate, all the expenses have to be paid. The 1/3 can be used for pretty much anything. So just to sort of clarify your question, it will come from the 1/3, but that's before the expenses are taken out. So expenses are there for your funeral and this and that, and then from that would be the 1/3. So as I said before, that it comes out of the entire estate. What ends up happening is, let's just say as an entire estate you have $100,000. Before you do the 1/3 of 33,000 and 66,000, all the expenses are paid, like the mortgages, the debts, the funeral expenses. So once that is done, then you would take out, then that 2/3 and 1/3 would come into play. And then the 2/3 would go to the inheritors from all the expenses. And then that 1/3 from that portion would now be for your qada namaz and fasting, as an example. Yes, that would go into that. Correct, would be into that, yeah. So that 1/3 again can be used for your own missed prayers and fasting. As a note, somebody asked me this recently, while we're alive, it's haram to pay somebody to pray or fast on our behalf. So today I have energy, I have namaz I missed, I have to make it up right now. But once I die, even when you die, it's not. So what happens when you die is that it's wajib on your eldest son to make up the father's missed namaz and fasting. If the father had too many and he didn't care to make them up, he didn't care to pray, then the eldest son doesn't have to make them up. He can if he wants to, but it's not wajib on him, because the father didn't care to do it, he didn't care about Islam. So the son is not obligated to do it. If he wants to do it, he can. But the first thing is that the eldest son has to make up the prayers. And I should also mention, because somebody asked me this the other day, is that the eldest son has to be baligh when the father passed away. So if you have a husband and wife, they have, let's say, 2 boys, 5 and 7 years old. If the father were to die and he had qada namaz, that 7-year-old, when he became baligh, he wouldn't be obligated to make up the namaz. Right? It's only if the boy is baligh when the father dies, does the namaz become wajib upon him to do for his father, and the prayer and the fasting. If the father says, you know what, I know I have it, and I know my son can do it, I don't want to burden him, I don't want to trouble him, then you can put in your will, for example, I missed 5 years of fasting, have that done for me. 2 years of prayers, make those up, and then your executor who will execute the will they will have to go and find the individuals or institutions that would do this service of qada namaz and fasting on behalf of that individual. Yes? Okay. Nobody will pray for you. Yes. Mm. It's not in the Quran, it's in the Hadith. But again, keep in mind that this is only in those instances where a father did not pray because he could not pray, or he missed one or two here and there. If you had a father, for example, who just didn't care about namaz at all, he didn't pray for years and years and years, then the eldest son doesn't have to do anything. So it's only, for example, let's say that the father is in the hospital, he's on ICU, he's missed a couple namaz because he's in that condition. Then that's when the eldest son would have to step in when the father dies and make those up. But if he knew his father he drank alcohol, na'udhu billah, he didn't pray, he didn't care, then Allah says, Hadith says basically, then there's no obligation on the boy at that point in time. Yes. Yes, the boy can. It's not wajib though. Again, there are some maraja who say it's mustahab, it's recommended for the son to do it for the mother, but not an obligation for that. Yeah. So prayers and fasting, and I think somebody had asked me one time about the cost of it. I think 1 year of prayers was 300 if I'm not mistaken, or was it more than that? 300 for a month, right? Right now, the current rate that people charge, and this is based on in Iran, because one of the things you have to do is when you pay somebody is you need to know that that person can actually do the prayers and fasting properly, right? Sometimes our community will look for the cheapest person. They'll just find somebody on the streets and they're back home and pay them to do it. But you don't know if they know all the proper rules and have the proper recitation. So there's an institute in Iran, and I don't have any affiliation with them, but I just trust them because they're students of the Hawza. And their current rate is $300 for 1 month of missed prayers. So that's about $4,000 a year for 1 year of missed prayers, $4,000 a year. And fasting is equally pricey, right? So God forbid if you have, if you are 15, 16, 17, 18, you didn't pray for 5 or 10 years. If you didn't pray for 10 years, that's $40,000 right there that you need to keep aside, right? Allah is Ghafur Rahim, definitely. Allah will forgive, but we have to do our part and show Allah that we're remorseful, right? So that means if I've got missed prayers now, I can't make up 5 years in 1 day, but I can start to do 1 extra namaz every day and ask Allah for forgiveness. That Allah, I've missed a lot when I was young. I'm doing my best now to make up. If I was to die before that, forgive me. And at the same time, keep a bit of money aside that can be used to pay for those prayers if you don't have anybody who will do it on your behalf for free. Right? Yes? Yes. Yeah. 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 Actually, we do have a Khums seminar planned, hopefully before I leave. I'm hoping in the 2nd week or 3rd week of January to have an entire day devoted to the Khums. But yeah, you bring up a very valid question, right? Like it's easier to make up missed namaz and fasting, right? It's easy for me to fast today if I missed one, last year. But how do I make up 10, 20 years of khums, which could be tens of thousands of dollars, maybe hundreds of thousands? It's much more difficult. But no, I'll definitely, when we have our session, 2nd or 3rd week of January, we have a whole program devoted to khums, so we'll talk about it then. Again, that 1/3, another option is for charitable purposes to build or maintain Islamic centers. Tabligh, right, to propagate the faith, publish books, for video work, any kind of tabligh work, humanitarian efforts, helping widows, orphans, A lot of our community members have these projects where they dig wells in India, in Pakistan, in Africa, in Afghanistan, right? Helping the widows, the orphans. That 1/3 could be given to any of these causes as well that you feel passionate about, that you want to donate to. Or you can give it to relatives who might not inherit from you, right? Maybe you have a grandparent who might not inherit, or a good cousin, right? Somebody who you are very close to, or a friend who won't inherit, but you want to give them some money, or you have some property that you want to give to them. And any relatives who might not get more than you want, right? Maybe you want your daughter to get more of the inheritance than the son. Rather than a conditional gift, you can also use the 1/3, and I'll give you some formulas how that would work. So here are a few examples of inheritance using the 1/3 option within a family. So a husband and a wife and one daughter. Normally the wife would get 12.5% of the inheritance. That's of that 2/3 of the inheritance. So let's just say, for argument's sake, the husband leaves $100,000, which is the 2/3. The wife would get 12.5% of that. So out of that 100,000, she'd get 12,500. The son would get 58,000 of that, and the daughter would get only 29,000. That's if the husband used his 1/3 on his personal, for Hajj, for missed prayers, for tabligh, for whatever donations he wanted to give. Sorry, let me just review that again. Sorry, other way around. That's if the husband used the 1/3. So if the husband leaves the 1/3, he could give, and he gave a bit of that to the wife, son, and the daughter. He could do it as 12.5% for the wife, 58 for the son, and the daughter would get 29. If he were to use his 33%, then 33% of that money is there. The remainder would be 8% for the wife, 39 for the son, and around 20% for the daughter. These are approximations. Again, we'll give you a website at the end that you can actually put in your own specifics, and it'll give you the actual, the numbers that would be fit for your example. And half, that's right, yeah. And another example here, we're using the 1/3 within the family. With the 1/3, so the top one is the 1/3 given to the wife. So the 1/3 the husband doesn't use for himself, he gives it all to the wife. She would get 41%, the son would get about 40, and then the daughter would get 19. Alternatively, if the husband wanted to give more to the daughter because, let's say, the son was well off or whatever, the daughter would get 52%. So you give the whole amount to the daughter. The son would get 39, and the wife would get 8.3%. So there are set numbers within the Sharia, which again the formulas will give you. With that 1/3, you can make a lot of modifications. You can give all of it to the wife, all of it to the son, all of it to the daughter, split it up 3 ways. You can use the conditional gifting as well that we talked about earlier to give, let's say you have a certain GIC or a certain stock investment in your portfolio. You could even gift certain assets to certain members as a conditional gift if you wanted to. But these are the general formulas that are within the religious teachings of the actual specific breakdowns. But as we said, there are always exceptions to the rule that can be used. So here's an example. A person passes away, a male passes away with a $100,000 estate. Let's say his funeral expenses were $10,000, that left $90,000. Personal loans and debts, mortgages, whatever, credit cards, $30,000, gives him $60,000. He uses 1/3 for his personal usage, for his, let's say, missed prayers or whatever. So there's $40,000 left for the inheritance, or that 2/3. From the $40,000, the son, or the wife rather, would get $5,000. The son would get $23,000, and the daughter would get just a little over $11,500. So that's a general. That's just playing by the numbers, by the book, right? Not by any other kind of gifts or anything within the inheritance. But again, when we give you the website, you can go on there and you can do your own sort of calculations and see how, what suits you the best in your own personal situation. Go over some various other important points that have come up. They're not necessarily within Islamic teachings. They're more contemporary issues that obviously our time speak about. So one of them is the eldest son, as we mentioned. So Ayatollah Sistani and many of our Maraji, if not all of them, say that the eldest son Not only does he get the obligation to pray the namaz for the father, the missed salat in those certain circumstances, but he's entitled to the father's ring, the Quran that the father used to recite from mostly, and hadith say a sword, but obviously we don't have swords and weaponry in today's. Sorry? Who's older? Whoever the older one is. First one who comes out is the eldest. So he gets all the good stuff and all the responsibilities. Even myself, I have cousins who are twins. They're born a couple of minutes apart, but that couple of minutes means that one gets all the hard work, and but he also gets more of the money. Okay. Oh, okay. I've never come across this. No. Okay. Oh, interesting. Okay. Okay. Sure. Yeah, please, if you. Okay. Yes. Yes, he would because yeah. Yes. Although the girls might be older, but the boy is yeah. So Quran ring and the sword which the father used to use. Even the scholars talk about the clothing that the father used to wear. But I mean in our society, I don't think our kids want to wear the father's clothing anymore, right? But it's there because obviously in traditional Arab culture, customs, these things were passed on, right, from generation, right? The clothes that let's say the clothes the Prophet wore, or the clothes of Amir al-Mu'mineen, they had value obviously to them, not material value but spiritual value. And in our culture, it's not there anymore, right? Like, our kids won't want the mother's hijab or the mother's chadar or the father's jeans. This goes into the recycling bin, right? But other things, obviously, they have that sentimental value to them. Again, the qada prayers, just as a note, so Ayatollah Sistani does mention in his book that if one's father had not performed his prayers, and he could have made them up, but in the event that he did not fail to perform them due to outright disobedience, then based on ihtiyat wajib, which means if another marja has a fatwa, because as we know, obligatory precaution, ihtiyat wajib, basically means that the marja doesn't have enough evidence to give a ruling. He says, I don't know for sure that this is the right thing, but based on all the evidence I have, this is the only conclusion I can possibly come to. So whenever your marja says obligatory precaution, ihtiyat wajib, you could, if another marja has a fatwa, he says wajib, then you can follow that one. So Sayyid Sistani says based on precaution that the eldest son performs them himself, the salat, or he hires somebody. As I mentioned, most times parents might not want to burden the child, so they'll just write it in their will that, use the money and get it done out of that 1/3. Again, Ayatollah Sistani says the qada prayers of one's mother are not obligatory to be done, although he says it's better that the son also does the mother's missed prayers if she had any. Again, that's if she wasn't intentionally missing those prayers, but they're just, when they're young or health issues and they couldn't make up some prayers, then it's better for the son to do it. Another part about the prayers, as it says, is that, again, if they knew about them, then that's one issue. If you don't know, obviously you can't perform them. So as long as you're able to sort of somehow determine how many there were, and that's again maybe a good thing to put into your will while you're alive. If you have missed prayers or fasting now, is to keep a little note that I've missed this many prayers, this much fasting, so that your inheritors know about it from this point on. And then as you grow, and if you make up those prayers, just continuously update your will. Maybe every year or every 2 years if possible. Yes? Mm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Correct.
What does it mean? It's all kind of nonsense, or it's different nonsense? So how we are taking just what is this giving me a message that okay, important we should do it, and that is not
Mhm.
So where is that concept of istighfar is there?
So definitely istighfar, as they're asking Allah for forgiveness, is there, right? And if it's done sincerely, right, we have to realize that istighfar, as there's a hadith actually Imam Ali alayhi salam gives in Najul Balagha, where he talks about istighfar being not only a word that you say, but he says it's a philosophy built upon nine foundations, right? So I don't recall all nine levels of istighfar, but he basically says that istighfar is not just to take a tasbih and say astaghfirullah, but it's to make payments back on what you missed, right? So it's not just to say, Allah, okay, astaghfirullah, Allah, I missed 1 year of prayer, istighfar, astaghfirullah, I'm done, right? True istighfar, true asking Allah for forgiveness means that you don't do that act again, right? But also you pay back what you've missed, right? So istighfar isn't just I take the tasbih out and do that 100 times or 1,000. I've missed certain obligations that I owed to Allah, right? True forgiveness means I make those back up again, right? Like Imam Ali in this hadith where he talks to an individual, the way the hadith is stationed is that Imam Ali is sitting with a companion and the companion says, astaghfirullah. And Imam Ali says to him, Thakulat ummuk. He says, like, may your mother weep over you. He says, do you know what istighfar is? He says that istighfar is a maqam, is a station built upon 9 foundations. And he talks about how it's verbally saying astaghfirullah. But then he gives the example of somebody who used to who used to steal money from people. So he talks about the fact that istighfar is like, you ate food with that, your skin developed flesh and fat on it. He said now istighfar is not just to say astaghfirullah, he says it's to fast until the flesh of your body goes right to the bone. Till all of that haram you ate, all of that fat that your body built because of what you had taken, is you melt that fat right down to the bone of your body and then you begin to add more flesh onto your body, right? He says istighfar is that, again, you resolve not to do that action again. Istighfar is that if you had taken somebody's right, you have to pay them back. Right? If I steal something from somebody, $5,000, $1,000, I do istighfar, Allah might forgive me, but I've taken haqqun nas. I've taken somebody's right, so I have to pay them back still. Right? Allah will say on the Day of Judgment, okay, I forgive you, you did something against my rule, but you have to have that person now forgive you as well. Right? So Imam Ali goes through 9 different levels like that, where he says that once you do all of these 9, then you have the right to say istighfar, and that your forgiveness will be accepted. So definitely Allah will forgive, like you mentioned, hadith say when you go to Hajj, and you even complete Arafat, it's as if all your sins are forgiven, but that can't be a license to neglect the responsibilities that we still have, right? The sin might be forgiven, but the action still has to be performed, right? Today, let's say you get a person gets a speeding ticket, right? $100, $200 speeding ticket. And the judge says, okay, if you don't pay it every time, there's a 2% or 5% penalty. And you don't pay for 6 months, a year or 2 years goes by, you finally go to the court, you appeal for clemency. The judge might say, okay, I'm willing to waive the interest charges on the ticket, but you still have to pay the initial ticket, right? As an example. Or today you get a credit card bill, and let's say you forget to pay your credit card bill on time. They charge you the $25 service charge and interest charges. You can call the company up and say, hey, I missed the payment, I was out of town, something happened. They'll say, okay, we will waive the interest charges, but you still have to pay your initial credit card bill, right? So I look at it with Allah the similar. Allah will say, I'll waive the punishment for not performing the action, but you still have to perform that action and still fulfill that obligation that that you had to do for me, right? So there's one things about the adhab and the punishment for the action, and another thing is the performance of that action. Okay. Sure. Okay. Mm-hmm. Sorry, so the parents? Okay. Okay. Yeah, so I mean, if he was, Well, they won't inherit the whole thing. If he has siblings, they would be inheritors, and but the parents also would be. No. So no, even the parents would inherit from him. Yeah, yeah. We go into another part, which is on the executor or executrix, masculine and feminine. Basically, this is the fancy term for the person who will carry out your will, right? So you pass away, you have this document, 30, 40-page document of things to do. Who's going to actually now implement that will? Who is going to pay your bills, give the money to the inheritors, find somebody to perform the missed namaz, the missed prayers, missed fasting? That's the executor. So they'll take care of all the legal and financial matters and religious matters of carrying out all of the things that you have written in that document. We'll go into a bit more detail on that. Just one note though, that because this came up in our previous session, I think, from Islamic perspective, the executor, or if there are multiple executors, at least one has to be a Muslim. So somebody asked me, can I have a law firm be my executor of my will? Because unfortunately in Canada, we don't have a community system yet. We have jamaats, we have institutions. We don't have an institution that can be an executor for a will for an individual. Right? A jamaat won't do it. Your resident alim probably won't do it. And legally, he obviously wouldn't be allowed to do it. But we don't have an institute that will do that, an institution. Right? You can go to your lawyer who's a non-Muslim. They can do it. They'll charge for it, obviously, but from the Islamic perspective, it's not allowed to have non-Muslims execute a will for a Muslim. If they do it, they can, but one Muslim has to be involved in that process, right, to oversee things from the Islamic perspective, right? So that's just one point to mention. Guardian for minor children. If anybody has children that are underage, in your will, actually, you're allowed to name a person that you want to serve as your guardian for your children. God forbid, husband and a wife are in a car accident or in a plane accident, and they both die together. Who will take care of the children? Right? You can specify somebody in the will. The court won't automatically, they'll obviously have to make sure that those people are able to take care of the children, that they have the ability. Obviously, otherwise there may be a ward of the state, and they might go through the whole, the system of adoption and that process, and they'll have to go through the legal system. But we can try to alleviate some of that and minimize some of that by appointing people. Obviously, we should talk to them beforehand. If we have family members, maybe you have a brother or a sister who says that I'm willing to be that guardian, God forbid something happens. It's always something to think about. And again, as your children grow older, you need to revise that will and make those changes as time goes on to make sure that these are all still current with your situation. But again, something to be very important to think about. Another issue which isn't obviously in Islam, but is something that I have thought about that is important for us to consider, is social media and email. Right? We all have email accounts. We're all on, or not all of us, but many of us are on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, these sorts of things. A lot of us do online banking, PayPal, we might buy Bitcoins, we might be investing online. What do you want to happen with all of that, right? Do you want your husband to automatically take over all your social media and your emails, and then he sees who you're talking to? Or the husband, do you want your wife to see all your personal email accounts and social media? Hopefully we're not doing anything bad behind our spouse, right? But it's a question that people ask, because who will own the account, right? All of these companies, they have rules, and not only because of privacy, but maybe your email account was tied to your bank account. Right? And emails were coming, or you had a business, and where do all those emails now end up, right? And maybe you want that business to continue, and those clients are emailing, and only that one person had the email password, right? So it's something to think about how you want that to be dealt with. Many of us maybe do online purchasing through PayPal, other systems. You have money in those accounts. That should go into your estate ultimately, and if nobody knows the passwords, it might be difficult to get access to them if they're not listed as a beneficiary. Does that money just end up in digital limbo? Who will get that money were you to pass away? So again, it's something very important to think about. Something a bit more probably relevant and practical for us, organ donation. Many people ask, can I give my kidneys, my heart, whatever, today science has done a head transplant recently, or face transplant recently. Where is the limit of organ donation? Can I just give anything I want, right? Again, we know that in the secular society, we have organ donor cards, or when you get your license, I think this is a part of the process if you want to be an organ donor. Islam obviously has a rule on this, just as the system that we live in has rules. And many people ask about it. What are we allowed to give? So I'll give just a few different opinions on this. So one is of the late Ayatul Ukhuy, about organ donation after you die. So you passed away, and you had mentioned in your will what you wanted to be done with your body in terms of donation. So the late Ayatul Ukhuy says that donating some of the organs, whether the major or minor, and he had a definition of what those were, after death is permissible as long as you've written it in your will. So I would say that the organ donor card is not enough, right? The card that the government gives us, the provincial, when we get our license or health card renewal, if they ask you for an organ donor, and if you follow the late Ayatollah Al-Khoy, if you want to donate organs, from his perspective it was allowed, but you need to write this in your will. If you followed him and you want organ donation to happen. Ayatollah Sistani, however, he does not accept this. He does not recognize any form of organ donation after you've died. So he says it's not permissible at all. So obviously, if you had it in your, let's say by the government system, in the when you got your license, you sign up as an organ donor, but your marja says it's not allowed, there becomes an issue, because at one level you wanted it to happen, but your marja says it's not allowed. That's where a challenge comes in. And in a lot of these inheritance rules, if you've written something in your will that goes against Islam, ultimately the executor of your will needs to know haram and halal and determine that if you wrote something that's not allowed, then he or she should not be doing that thing, even though you've written it in your will. So for you and I, if somebody approaches you to become an executor for their will, I don't want to dissuade you from it, but it becomes difficult because we need to know haram and halal to be able to make those judgment calls. Right? Somebody write in their will, I want my kidneys to be donated to organ donation. And now the doctors come to you, they say, you're the executor of the will, he's just passed away a few minutes ago, he wanted his organs donated. What does the will say? And the will says this, but Islamically it's haram for him. Becomes a bit of a challenge, right? So you have to talk to the person before you become the executor. You yourself need to know what's haram and halal enough to be able to deal with that situation. But as it says that Sayyid Sistani, after death does not allow it. But there are other scholars that do allow it. It's a field which is evolving and changing. So today this is the ruling. Tomorrow the Maharaja may have a different opinion on it, obviously, because ijtihad is like that, it changes with time. And what might not be allowed today may be allowed tomorrow. No, because he has a fatwa on this. Yeah. Organ donation? For, mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, I had this discussion with somebody on a WhatsApp group recently, and I checked the rulings that Ayatul Sistani had given. Let me just see if I could find it here really quickly for you, because actually Maulana Rizvi had written a very in-depth article about this quite recently. So kidney is allowed while you're alive. While you're alive, all the Maharaj allow it because you're alive, but after death is where the issue comes in. So for example, here, this is a recent article written by Maulana Rizvi. Can a person donate some of his organs to a patient who is in need of transplantation? During your life, the late Ayatollah Khoy had a different verdict on major and minor organs. He had allowed donation of minor, but disallowed major organs. The definition of a minor organ, he said, is that organ which has the ability to regenerate itself, like blood donation, skin grafting, and bone marrow transplants. But the kidney, he says, was a major organ. So late Ayatul Khoy did not allow, according to this article, major organ, which is a kidney even at that time. Ayatul Sistani, however, does not differentiate between major and minor. As long as the donor would not be seriously handicapped by him or herself, there is not a problem in donating a major or minor while alive. So according to Ayatul Sistani today, if you had to give one of your kidneys while you're alive, that's okay, because you have another kidney that will still function. So that's not a problem from Ayatul Sistani's point of view. After the death, Ayatul Khoy, what we mentioned, a contemporary scholar, Ayatollah Nasir Makarim Shirazi, also allows organ donation after death as long as it's in the will. So there is one Maraja who allows it today. He said you can give any part of your body in organ donation after death as long as you've written it in your will. And he's a contemporary scholar who lives in Qum right now. Ayatollah Khamenei allows it, provided the body does not look like it is being mutilated. So Ayatollah Khamenei says as long as the way they cut the body to remove the organs does not look like the body's been completely mutilated, and I think they have respect when they cut the bodies for those, he allows it. So Ayatollah Khamenei allows organ donation even after death. But Ayatollah Sistani and Jawad Tabrizi do not recognize it. So there is again that difference between some of the Maraja. Another question was, is it necessary for the recipient to be a Muslim? And the response was the recipient does not have to be a Muslim. You can donate to anybody, Muslim or not. Because here in our society, we can't determine that, right? It's first come, whoever needs it first will get it first, right? There's no way that we can get that. As a side note, as a question somebody asked, that can a Muslim accept a transplant from a non-Muslim? People say, oh, they're najis, whatever. That's not an issue, because there is no issue of najasat there, because it's a body part, right? So all the scholars say there's no problem with that. If a minor child dies, so a child who's underage, if they die, can the parent donate their organs on behalf of the child? Ayatollah Khoy Sistani says that no parent has the right to donate his child's organs on their behalf. But Ayatollah Nasir Makarim and Ayatollah Khamenei, they allow this. So they allow the parents to donate their children's organs on behalf of the child if they died as minors, so underage children. And somebody asked a question here that if organ donation is allowed, what about if I were to donate my heart or a kidney and somebody got it and they committed sins with it, right? They came and they became a killer or murderer, they committed haram actions. Because they have my heart, am I now accountable on the Day of Judgment? Will Allah hold me accountable for that? And the answer basically in a nutshell is no. Once that organ leaves your body, goes into their body, it's now their body, right? It's no longer your heart. So if they sin or steal or do anything, that's not on your sin, that's on them. Just like blood, right? We give blood bank donations. If a sinner gets our blood, we're not going to be accountable for it, right? Because they committed they're bad people, or they drink alcohol, or they do this, right? So there's no issue in terms of accountability after the transfer has taken place. Going from there onto a concept of a living will. A living will basically is something very important. It's separate from the will that we've been talking about, but it can be a part of it. So basically what a living will is, the definition is any instructions that you want to provide your medical caregiver, how to deal with you if you become ill or incapacitated, right? Maybe there's certain treatment you don't want. You don't want to be resuscitated, right? You don't want certain things to happen to you, or you want to remain on the machines until you eventually die, for example. Basically, whatever healthcare decisions you want need to be specified in this living will. Otherwise, obviously, they may, and I just the other day I was listening to CBC News, and they had a legal advisor on the air, and they were talking about this issue about a living will. And the person, basically, the lawyer said that if you don't have a living will and you are, let's say, in the hospital in a coma, you can't talk, you're completely out, or they've induced coma from the hospital, from the doctors, they said the doctors are ethically required, or ethically they should ask your family for advice, but they're not legally obligated to implement the advice that your family gives if you have not named somebody to be in that living will. So for example, if you, we don't know what will happen to us. We don't know if we'll have an accident and go into a coma or some problem. If I don't have in my will that I appoint my wife, my father, my sister, whoever as a somebody who will make those healthcare decisions on my behalf, legally the hospital doesn't have to ask your family for advice on what to do to you or with you. But if you name somebody, then they are legally obligated to contact that person and say, what do you want done? The person is on a resuscitator, they're this, they're that. Then they have to talk to that person, and that person would tell the doctors what to do, and the doctors are pretty much obliged to follow it. I mean, they could take it to court and go further, but I don't think they would do it. But again, case by case, it may change. But really, to avoid all of these challenges is right now, while we're alive, we should find out what our obligation is. Right? Are we allowed to come off of life support machines? It's a different discussion. Maybe we'll talk about it another day, because I haven't also done all the research in contemporary what the current scholars have said. But we should find out what the rulings are and write that in our will now, that if this and this were to happen to me, if I'm incapacitated, this person should look after my health issues and what I want done with myself. Again, as mentioned here, that create this living will with your lawyer if you have one and discuss it. And if we have a lawyer in our community, again, it would be a good opportunity to have a session with them to discuss these issues. Talk to your religious scholars, talk to family members, talk to your physician if you have a family physician of what you want done with yourself if, God forbid, you're in that particular situation. Yes? Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm. Yeah. Inshallah, let's see if we have time, if we can do it in the time available, yeah. A power of attorney is another thing to keep in mind. So the living will was about our personal health issues, who will deal with them. Power of attorney basically means that were you to have a stroke, let's say, who in your family or your friends would take care of your day-to-day living? Who has the right to withdraw from your personal bank accounts? Let's say you're the breadwinner in the home and all the bank accounts in your name, right? The credit card's in your name. The wife doesn't have a credit card, doesn't have her own personal bank account. She doesn't have the passwords for the online banking. She doesn't have signing authority. How will she get money to pay the bills, right? If you're in that situation, the power of attorney will say that, the person will say, I will designate this person to have the right to, not only in terms of personal issues, but talk to the banks to be able to access the funding, access the funds which are in the accounts. If the government comes, the courts come and say there's some issue, who's going to talk on behalf of that individual who can't speak for themselves? That power of attorney becomes important. It might not be a family member. You might say, well, they might be so distraught and in such a mental state that they can't do it. Well, then do you have family in town? Do we have institutions or organizations? Do we have a community-based institute that can act as a power of attorney? Again, it's something to be very cognizant of because we never know what kind of health challenges we could have at the last moment. Power of attorney number 2, again, it allows that person to manage your affairs, for them to be, signing authority for the banks to talk to them. Let's say you have to sell the car, you have to cash some RSPs and you have to cash some GICs in, right? If that person doesn't have the authority to talk on your behalf, then that money sits there and nobody can access it. So again, a very important thing. Let's go to some of the actual funeral portions. So funeral arrangements are also important to keep in mind in our will. Who will conduct your ceremony? Right? Do you want the resident alim, for example, to lead the namaz al-mayyit? Maybe you don't want him there. It's possible. Maybe you don't like him, right? But maybe, like, you know, we had obviously we've had cases where family members wanted to lead the namaz al-mayyit, and it's best, right? Like, somebody passes away, it's the closest family member. They have the first right to say, I want to lead the namaz al-mayyit, I want to go in the grave, I want to do the talqeen, right? It's their right to do it. Traditionally in our communities, it's been the resident alim or whoever's the most active person on the ghusl kafan committee, on the burial committee. They do all of these things. But if you say no, if God forbid your family member dies, you say, I want to do that. It's my right, and I want to be there, right? So you should mention in your will and write it specifically that if I die and die in my home city, I want my husband to do my ghusl, let's say. I don't want the ghusl committee to do the ghusl. I want the husband to do it. Or I don't want somebody to do it, you know. But be specific in that, and we have a right to do it, right? Kafan, maybe again you want somebody in your family to do it, you don't want the community to do it, well and good, it's their right to do it, it's their family member. The Salatul Mayyit, I mean, we've seen that before, that, you know, family members wanted to lead it, and it's by all means, it's their right to do it. Nobody should interfere with that, it's the family's decision, right? And we have to respect the family. Where do you want to be buried? It's a huge issue, right? Some people say, no, I want to be buried, let's say you go for ziyarah, do you want to be buried there in Najaf, or do you want to be sent back to Canada? If you die here, do you want your body to be sent back overseas? You should mention in your will that, you know, if I die, I want to be buried back home or in my local city or wherever, you know, wherever you want that to be buried, right? Again, keeping in mind that the expenses are there as well that have to be covered. Do you already have a plot reserved? Maybe you have bought a plot, let's say here in Edmonton, you have a specific grave. Make note of it in your will that I bought plot number 200. When I die, bury me in this plot, right? So be specific about it. Again, what happens if you die in another country? Make note that in your will. You know, should they send you back home? Should they just bury you there? All of those things should be taken care of again, so it doesn't cause more confusion for the family once the death occurs. And as we conclude, before we go into a Q&A, obviously, as we said that you know, we should ensure that our journey to the next world can be as smooth as can be. And the best way to do that is to write a will and ensure that everybody's rights are maintained within it, that everybody's financial rights are there, everybody's personal obligations have been covered, your debts have been fulfilled, things you owed to people are maintained, and that you've done the best that you can do. Obviously the executors are responsible, but as long as we've done our best, then as the hadith in the beginning mentioned from Imam Ali alayhi salam, that it is as if you had given all of your wealth away in your lifetime. So again, a great reward for ensuring that all of our own affairs are put in order before we pass away. Just to note on some of the references that I've used, one is the book that Maulana Rizvi has written, the Writing the Islamic Will, the 6th edition, which came out this past February. RBC Insurance, if you're interested, the Royal Bank of Canada, they have an insurance will planning website. It's actually a really good website. There's a lot of information I took from their website for today. They go into a lot of the financial issues, the financial planning, how to deal with a lot of the personal assets. So definitely look at their planning guide online. It's very, very detailed. ShiaWills.org is the website I talked about. You go online, you put in your details, you put, you know, are you a male or a female, married, single, how many children, their genders, your parents, all of this, and it'll give you the entire breakdown of who gets how much percentage. And if you put an amount in, like a dollar figure, just as a sample, it'll give you the amounts each person will get. It actually gives you a sample will as well, but I wouldn't recommend to use that. It's very generic, but it's definitely a good starting block to get the percentages for your specific requirements. And also Sheikh Jafar, who's been here before, he had also given a will presentation some years ago in Masumeen Center, so I've also used his presentation in today's. And last but not least, again, if you have any questions, this website, ShiaWills.org, has a lot of details, and if you have anything else outside of the discussion today, you can send me an email and we can inshallah talk about it and hopefully give you some further guidance on this aspect.